All right, everybody. I want to welcome you back to Pastor's Point of View. My name is Dr. Andy Woods, and I'm the pastor teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. And I'm back with my friend and colleague, fellow elder, Dr. Jim McGowan.
It's good to be back.
So here we go again, Brother Jim, for another exciting Friday with Pastor's Point of View. Normally we've been talking about theology in our theological questionnaire, but the problem is explosive events continue to transpire all around us that need commentary.
Yeah, to say the least.
And so there's a lot of things going on in the world, and today what we're going to focus on here, July the 13th, 2018, is Donald Trump has made an appointment to the United States Supreme Court.
Yep.
He has appointed Brett Kavanaugh. And, of course, whether he gets on or not, Kavanaugh, that is, depends on the confirmation by the Senate, his survival in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and a vote by the Senate. Most people think he's going to get that.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk to people today about why this, I don't think, is a very good pick that he's made at all.
Yeah.
And the Republican machine, which we're not part of, we're independent. So if you're tuning in today looking for a pro-Donald Trump, pro-Republican appraisal, you might want to go somewhere else.
Mute the sound?
Yeah, mute the sound. Generally, personally speaking, I think I can speak for Jim a little bit, but feel free to interject. I like a lot of the things Donald Trump has done, but this would be an example where I think a mistake is about to be made.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And we're going to expose that today because the Republican and even mainstream conservative organizations are all getting behind Kavanaugh. They're all sort of portraying him as some kind of strict constructionist to the Constitution. And we're going to show today that he's nothing but.
Yeah.
He's yet another swamp creature that's about to be put into a position of authority when Trump told us he was going to drain the swamp.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, when you get into an issue like this, you're either offending one side or the other. And I'm afraid this time around, we're going to offend a lot of our friends rather than enemies.
Yeah, we're putting our big targets on our chest today.
Yeah. So one of the things I want to get to, before you can even deal with a subject like this, is I don't think you can analyze it right unless you understand American history.
Yes.
And today, who is going to be on the Supreme Court has become a big, big deal. Never used to be that way historically, but now it's a big deal. And there's a wonderful citation here we're going to read from a guy named Lino Graglia, University of Texas law professor and former federal appellate court nominee. And I wish he had survived the confirmation process and he was on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
The way this professor writes. But notice what he says as he sums up the current crisis in constitutional interpretation. Keep in mind he made these remarks all the way back in 1985.
Wow.
So this is a long-standing problem.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're quoting, and here we go. Judicial usurpation of legislative power has become common and so complete that the Supreme Court has become our most powerful and important instrument of government in terms of determining the nature and power of American life. Questions literally of life and death, abortion and capital punishment, of public morality, control of pornography, prayer in schools, and government aid to religious schools, and of the public safety, criminal procedures, and street demonstrations, are all now in the hands of judges under the guise of constitutional law. He goes on. The fact that the Constitution says nothing of, say, abortion, and indeed explicitly and repeatedly recognizes the capital punishment that the court has come close to prohibiting, has made no difference. The result is that the central truth of constitutional law today is that it has nothing to do with the Constitution except that the words due process or equal protection are almost always used by the judges in stating their conclusions. Not to put too fine a point on it, constitutional law has become a fraud, a cover for a system of government by the majority vote of a 9-person committee of lawyers, unelected and holding office for life. Close quote.
So that kind of sums it up, doesn't it?
Wow, that hits the nail on the head.
Yeah, we're living in a oligarchy.
Yeah, we are.
Oligos means few, you know from your study of
Yes.
Greek. Oligarchy means being ruled by a few.
Yeah.
And so literally our most important questions in our society are now in the hands not of the elected representatives, but of the Supreme Court, who can twist the Constitution any way they want because they think Constitution is a living document.
Yeah.
And this sort of expresses the crisis that we're in. That's why whoever gets on the court now has become a big, big deal.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Now, did it used to be this way? Notice Thomas Jefferson there. I think it's slide number 3. Thomas Jefferson, of course, was one of our founding fathers, wrote the Declaration of Independence. And I think he would know something about the way the Supreme Court was supposed to function. Notice this quote here from Thomas Jefferson.
Yes, and let me I have to comment here just very quickly, is just, again, one of the reasons we're in the position that we're in today is, as you said at the very beginning of the program today, people don't know history.
Right.
Listen to what Jefferson said here, quoting, "Carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted. Recollect the spirit in the debates, and instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, conform to the probable one in which it was passed." Close quote.
That's what judges were supposed to do, according to the original
That
design.
was the expectation.
And, they weren't there to make things up. They weren't there to rewrite the Constitution.
Right.
They weren't there to treat it like a living document.
Right.
Their whole function was to go to the original intent of the document and apply it to the matters that came before them.
Yes.
And so our founding fathers were very afraid that one day the Supreme Court could become a runaway oligarchy.
Yes.
And Jefferson, again, in another quote, this takes us to slide 4, is prescient in making what almost looks to be a prophecy.
Yeah.
Describing our day.
Yeah.
And notice what Jefferson says there.
He must have had his crystal ball when he said this. So again, we're quoting Thomas Jefferson. He says, "You seem to consider judges as the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions. A very dangerous doctrine indeed, and one which would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy. Our judges are as honest as other men, and not more so. And their power the more dangerous, as they are in office for life, and not responsible as the other functionaries are to the elective control. The Constitution has erected no such single tribunal." Close quote.
Wow. So he says, don't get yourself into a position, America, where you put all of your most important matters in the hands of the Supreme Court.
That's exactly
because that'll turn you into an oligarchy. And that's particularly true because jurists at the federal level are appointed for life. If I don't like what they do, I have no recourse against them.
Yeah, and he says that they become a tribunal.
A tribunal.
Wow.
And that's where we are today,
Wow.
and that's why we're all worried about who gets on the court.
Yeah.
And unless we're going to tear down this paradigm, which is I suggest we do, until we do that, we got to figure out who this Brett Kavanaugh exactly is. What's his record?
Yeah.
That's why we're voicing our concerns about this.
Yes.
Because this is going to have far-reaching implications long after Donald Trump has left the scene.
Yeah.
Just like the appointment of Justice Kennedy had long-standing implications that we're facing today, long after Ronald Reagan had died, had left office and then died. Now, people say, well, you guys are in favor of interpreting the Constitution according to what the founders intended. You're not in favor of a living document. So notice how the verbiage is arrayed against us already.
Mm-hmm.
We're not in favor of a living document, so you guys must be in favor of a dead document.
Yeah.
That's the implication.
Right.
Well, no, we're not in favor of that. The Constitution is a living document. There's a way to change it, though.
That's right.
It's called Article 5. Which is the amendment process. We've done it several times in our nation's history.
It's true.
And that puts the power of changing the document in the hands of the people's elected representatives.
Right.
It's a deliberately cumbersome process when you study it.
Yes.
I think you got to get 3/4 of the states to sign on. I think I may have this not specifically accurate, but I think 2/3 of the Senate. In other words, if you study it, Article 5, it's hard to do.
Right.
And it's
intentionally.
And it places the power in the hands of the people's representatives, not in the hands of 5 judges. And we say 5 because you only need 5 for a majority opinion. Yeah. In the oral Warren Court days, they used to quip with 5 votes we can do anything. Yeah. And the amendment process places it in the hands of the people's representatives. Notice would George Washington know something about America as the father of our country?
I believe so.
Notice this quote from him. I think this is slide 5. Notice him discussing this.
So we mentioned Thomas Jefferson. Let's go back a little further. George Washington. Look what he says here, quoting: "If in the opinion of the people, the distribution or modification of the constitutional powers be at any particular wrong, let it be corrected by an amendment the way the Constitution designates. But let there be no change by usurpation, though this may in one instance be the instrument of good, it is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed." Close quote.
You want to change the document, amend it properly.
Amend it.
Now, if the Supreme Court amends it from the bench, they might be able to do good in an instance or two. Mm-hmm. But once you give them the power, the ability to do good is also the ability to do evil.
That's right. And
George Washington warned that this would be the beginning of the destruction of our republic if we let this toothpaste out of the tube,
Yeah,
so to speak.
He says it can be an instrument of good, but notice the wording, but it can also be a weapon used against us.
And that's basically what's happening.
That's what's happening.
As we're going to explain today. So what went wrong? Well, the theory of evolution came along in 1859. Yeah. And the legal theorists started to say, well, if a man is evolving upward, then we can't be bound by 18th century principles. And so the document needs to evolve upward as well. Yeah. And who's to evolve it upward? Not the amendment process, the way the document ordains, but the judges. And we have this quote here from slide 6 from Fred Cahill, a Yale University political science professor, making this very point.
Yes, here we go. Quoting: "The appearance in the mid-19th century of the concept of evolution was an event of transcending importance to the development of American jurisprudence. This involved a shift from the rationalistic deductive pattern characteristic of the pre-Darwinian period to the empirical evolutionary approach that is followed today." Close quote.
So evolution changed everything.
Yes, it did.
Most people think evolution is just a battle amongst people that have a scientific background. Yeah. No, it's a worldview.
Yeah, it is.
And as it became accepted, it affected jurisprudence.
Yeah.
And I like this quote here. I think it's slide 7 from Dr. John Eidsmoe, making this point as well.
Yes, Dr. Eidsmoe, quoting: "Underlying the disagreement over interpretation of the Constitution is a confrontation between the two worldviews, the creationist, abolitionist, Newtonian views of the framers versus the evolutionist, relativist, Darwinian views of most legal scholars today." Close quote.
So you have the static meaning view of Jefferson, Washington, etc. And then you have the living document view of most legal scholars today. Most law schools today teach this idea that a function of a judge is to evolve the document upward, independent of Article 5 in the amendment process.
Wow.
And so that's why whenever someone gets on the Supreme Court, we're trying to figure out what their worldview is, what their politics is. See, that never used to matter.
Yeah.
When the Supreme Court was functioning the way it's supposed to.
Right.
So
Right.
now that everything has been altered thanks to Darwinian evolution and its application to jurisprudence, now we've got to sit and examine these Supreme Court justices, prospective justices, very, very carefully.
Yes.
A lot of people today have bought into two major cultural lies. Number one, they think that the judicial branch of government is an equal branch of government compared to the other branches of government.
Yeah.
They also think that the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of all constitutional issues. And they also think that the Supreme Court, the judicial branch of government, is independent. All three of those are cultural myths when you go back to our founding fathers.
Right. Got to know history.
Got to know history. Now, is the United States Supreme Court an equal branch of government compared to the legislative and executive? Three branches of government, right? Judicial interprets the law, legislative makes the law, executive enforces the law. When the founding fathers set up this republic, did they think that the judicial branch of government was going to be equal to the other two? Not at all. We have Federalist Paper number 78. The Federalist Papers were written by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison, three heavy hitters.
Yeah.
And they were trying to convince the citizens of New York to ratify the Constitution. So the Federalist Papers are a tremendous source of light concerning what the judicial branch of government was supposed to be. And Alexander Hamilton depicted the judiciary as the branch of government that posed the least dangerous threat to the Republic in Federalist Paper number 78.
That was his understanding of how it should be.
It's supposed to work.
Yeah.
So when you read Federalist number 78, you will see that the Supreme Court is not an equal branch of government.
That's right.
It's a branch of government.
Right.
But it's not an equal branch of government.
I wonder if he's turning over in his grave today.
If he could see what's going on today, he would certainly be turning over in his grave. Is the Supreme Court independent? Not at all. When you look at Article 3, Section 1, Article 3 covers the judiciary of the Constitution. And can you just read that underlined portion there of Article 3? Article 3 is very short, by the way, compared to the other articles that govern the other branches of government. Article 1, if I remember right, governs the legislature. That's what they were really afraid of. Article 2 governs the presidency. And Article 3, there's hardly anything said about the judiciary in comparison to those other branches of government, which shows you that the one they wanted to put handcuffs on was not the judiciary, but it was the legislative and the executive. But read that underlined section there from Article 3, Section 1 of the United States Constitution.
All right, here's what it says. The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior.
So judges exist as long as their behavior is good.
It's very interesting.
And you have to go back and analyze what they meant by good behavior. There are cases early on where if a judge used profanity in the courtroom, he could be impeached and removed from office.
A Supreme Court justice.
Supreme Court justice.
And
there's other cases where a judge was drunk in his private life. And people say, well, that's just private life.
That doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Well, he was removed from office for that. And if a judge, of course, doesn't follow the Constitution, he's supposed to be impeached and removed from office. So this idea that judges are independent is wrong. This idea that the Supreme Court is equal to the other branches of government is incorrect. And there are times in history where presidents have said, you know what, the Supreme Court has ruled, but let them enforce their ruling. I'm not going to follow their ruling. This happened with the infamous Dred Scott case, if I'm not mistaken. So this idea that the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of all constitutional questions is wrong. And you say, well, what does this have to do with what's going on right now? Because everything's been altered because of Darwinian evolution. Now we got to look very carefully into the worldview of Supreme Court justices because they have tremendous amount of power. So enter the picture Brett Kavanaugh. This is why we got to look at him very carefully. And a lot of people today are being conditioned to believe that the guy's a conservative.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because we have what's called Trump derangement syndrome. I was
TDS.
I was just on social media and I saw there was a reference to Hillary Clinton making a speech that says, if you guys approve of Kavanaugh, he's going to bring back slavery. So there's a mindset out there that no matter what Trump does, the left is going to hate it and oppose it. And our side digs in our heels. And we're reflexive the other way, where we want to support the president no matter what he does.
Yeah.
And I think both sides are making a huge mistake here. Because this guy, Brett Kavanaugh, is not at all a conservative, as we're going to try to demonstrate. In fact, there are swamp creatures on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat.
That's the truth.
And Donald Trump ran on draining the swamp. And I don't know if Trump made a deal with somebody. I don't know if he's getting a lot of bad advice, but he got some. He's not making a good pick here.
Something suspicious.
His Gorsuch pick was much better than what we're getting with this guy.
Yeah.
But look at this quote here. I don't think we have a slide on this, but notice this quote from Carol Quigley, longtime professor of political science at Georgetown University and personal mentor of Bill Clinton, who made the following statement in his 1966 book, Tragedy and Hope.
Okay, this is from the personal mentor of Bill Clinton. Yeah. So, here we go. The chief problem of American political life for a long time has been how to make the two congressional parties more national and international. The argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea acceptable only to doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. But either party in office becomes in time corrupt, tired, enterprising, and vigorless. Then it should be possible to replace it every 4 years, if necessary, by the other party, which will be none of these things, but will still pursue with new vigor approximately the same basic policies. Close quote.
Yeah. He's called the professor that knew too much.
You know, I used to be a missionary in Mexico, and this is the problem that Mexico had, was they have parties, but they're no different.
Right. And Quigley says you've got to get globalists and progressives in both parties.
Yeah.
That way, if the people get tired of one party, nothing really changes. Now, haven't we seen this in our lifetime? I mean, I've seen the House of Representatives and the Congress change hands several times.
Yeah.
All of these quote conservatives come to power with these glowing promises about how they're going to do all these wonderful things, shrink government, reduce the tax burden, and nothing really changes.
Yeah.
In fact, here's a little saying I wrote down here, Brother Jim: the more things change, the more they actually stay the same.
Yes.
And why is that? We're seeing evidence of it here in these Supreme Court picks, because a Supreme Court justice, this guy Kavanaugh, should he be confirmed, it looks like he's going to be confirmed, is going to far outlast Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Just like Kennedy, as we mentioned before, far outlasted the legacy of Ronald Reagan. And I want you to understand something about the Republican Party, folks. And I vote Republican basically in every election. So this is my own party that I'm criticizing here. The Republican Party has a tremendous ability to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. They have an amazing ability to lose and to blow it when they shouldn't have blown it.
Right.
And with Republican presidents, you've got about a 1 in 2 chance of getting a good Supreme Court pick. Now, there have been some good ones. Rehnquist, Scalia, Thomas, Alito, and we're hoping Gorsuch seems to be fitting in that category. But let me give you some lousy Republican picks. You ready for this?
Here we go.
Here's a guy named Harry Blackmun, who wrote the infamous Roe versus Wade decision. Do you know who appointed Harry Blackmun? Richard Nixon, who ran in 1968, getting the judiciary to come back to its founding vision. We have my hero, Ronald Reagan, political hero, appointing someone named Sandra Day O'Connor to the court.
Yes.
Who was promoted at the time as a pro-life jurist, and she ended up upholding Roe. You have Ronald Reagan, my political hero, the most conservative president in my lifetime, appointing Kennedy, who's now retiring, who not only upheld Roe in the Planned Parenthood versus Casey decision, but also gave us this terrible Obergefell same-sex marriage decision. Keep in mind, this is coming from the pens of Republican appointees. You have Bush 41 appointing David Souter. David Souter gave us the Kelo decision. The Kelo decision basically lowers the threshold the government has to demonstrate before it takes someone's private property. So it attacks the inalienable right of private property. And Bush 43 gave us Chief Justice Roberts, who upheld Obamacare. So my concerns about Kavanaugh historically are well-founded, given this terrible track record that my party, the Republican Party, has. And so, as Yogi Berra said, it's deja vu all over again. All of these guys I just mentioned, and I'm old enough to remember every one of them except for Blackmun, were all promoted as we're getting a conservative in there, we're getting a constitutionalist in there, we're going to overturn Roe versus Wade. They got in office, or they got in the position, and none of them did what they said they were going to do. So are we justified in expressing some concerns about Brett Kavanaugh, given this background? So all of that was just introduction. And the way you determine the weight or the validity or the worldview of a potential Supreme Court justice is you have to look at their paper trail. How have they, not what they say in their speeches, not them standing up at public ceremonies and showing everybody they have a nice family. And the guy does look like he has a very nice family. You have to look at what they have done, or what they have written in the past. Now, this guy Kavanaugh has done some good things, but there's some bad things. And I'm hoping that the people watching this will email their senators and demand that they get answers to these questions before this guy is confirmed. And if we don't get some decent answers on these 9 things, then I think the plug should be pulled on this guy. I think we should do to him what we did to Harriet Miers, where George W. Bush 43, wanted to appoint this woman, Harriet Miers, to the Supreme Court. No one knew anything about her. The conservatives got upset about this, and her nomination was pulled. I think the same kind of thing needs to happen with this guy Kavanaugh, unless we get some decent answers to these questions. So here are 9 criticisms, and that's why we've entitled this session Unmasking Brett Kavanaugh. 9 concerns I have. Some of them come from an article written by one of my favorite political writers. Daniel Horowitz wrote an article called Putting Kavanaugh in Perspective. So issue number 1 is the Obamacare regulation was redefined as a tax and not a mandate or a penalty. Now, that's a lot of legal minutia there, but that's what got Obamacare upheld by Chief Justice Roberts. Now, where did Roberts get this idea that you could view Obamacare as a tax and not a mandate or a penalty? He got the idea from, guess who? Brett Kavanaugh. because Kavanaugh contributed to a decision called the Seven Sky v. Holder decision 2011. And notice what Mr. Horowitz says, Daniel Horowitz says about that decision. Would you mind reading that paragraph there from the Horowitz article? And I'm going to give you these issues in rapid fire, so stay with us.
Yeah.
And I hope you'll stick around because issue number 9 is the biggie.
All right, here we go.
Here we go.
Obamacare regulation as a tax. Kavanaugh wrote a dissenting opining
I'm sorry.
that the individual mandate of Obamacare could not be challenged in court because under the Anti-Injunction Act of 1867, no lawsuit can be brought until the plaintiff actually was forced to pay the tax, which in this case wasn't for another few years. I'm a big stickler for courts staying in their lane and properly abiding by rules of standing. But in this case, his entire rationale was built upon a dangerous premise that a government mandate/penalty was really a tax. This served as the basis for John Roberts' infamous opinion upholding Obamacare.
So issue number 1, Obamacare is not a mandate, but it's a tax, which served as a basis for upholding that by Roberts. Who let the toothpaste out of the tube on that one? Who gave him the idea? Brett Kavanaugh did.
Way to go, Brett.
So you better ask your senators, you better demand your senators get to the bottom of this before this guy's confirmed.
Yep.
Issue number 2, illegal immigrants have a right to get an abortion. Can you read that paragraph to us?
All right.
From the Horowitz article.
Yes. Immigration is perhaps the most important issue winding through the courts now, and most of the nominees had thin records on the issue. I haven't seen anything big on the fundamental issues of the plenary power doctrine, for better or worse. However, as we reported last year, the D.C. Circuit absurdly granted an illegal alien the right to demand access to an abortion. While Kavanaugh rightly dissented on the grounds that the opinion drastically expanded abortion jurisprudence, he declined to sign on to Judge Karen Henderson's indispensable dissent, finally laying down the law on sovereignty and the plenary power doctrine. That was a much-needed dissent given what is going on throughout the circuits on immigration, and it is a bit peculiar that he didn't sign on to that dissent, while Henderson signed on to Kavanaugh's dissent tackling the abortion angle.
Now, here's an article from Ricardo Davis from Georgia Right to Life, and he similarly says, quote, Davis also noted, or an article about Davis, I should say, also noted that Judge Kavanaugh agreed that minor illegal immigrants have a constitutional right to abortion.
Wow.
So, your senators, I hope this comes up in the confirmation hearings.
I do too.
Because that's a big issue. Issue number 3, government has a compelling interest to impose contraception, and not just contraception, but forms of contraception which cause abortions in people. The government has a compelling right to impose contraception on religious institutions. Kavanaugh seems open to that idea. Now, keep in mind, Horowitz is going back into the man's writings.
Wow.
He's not looking at his family, not looking at a bunch of slogans, not looking at a bunch of public interest groups that have become cheerleaders for this man, not looking at what the Republican Party has said, but what does this man say in his decisions? Not promoting him because of we're trying to react against Trump derangement syndrome. But what has the man actually written? And can you read that little excerpt from the Horowitz piece?
Up here?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Almost every circuit upheld Obamacare's contraception mandate. Like most of the originalist judges, Kavanaugh dissented from these opinions and sided with plaintiffs in Priests for Life, which is good. But what is still puzzling is that he gratuitously and explicitly conceded that the government has a compelling interest in facilitating women's access to contraception. While the Supreme Court did assume that the government might have a general interest in promoting conception, the court never assumed, much less ruled, that such an interest would apply to the narrow subset of employees at religious institutions. The fact that he didn't join the stronger dissent from Judges Brown and Henderson, built upon the premise that the government must find a compelling interest specifically in mandating seamless coverage, raises concerns that we don't see him categorically opposing the left on these issues and joining Thomas on the court.
Now, Ricardo Davis of Georgia Right to Life, in an article found on AmericanSurvival.org entitled "Trump Urged to Withdraw Kavanaugh Nomination," this following statement is made. In addition, the judge struck a blow to religious freedom in the Priest for Life case by agreeing that the government has a compelling interest in requiring organizations to provide contraceptives. How do you pronounce that next word?
Abortifacients.
There, thank you. And go ahead. Facients to their employees. So that's issue number 3. Kavanaugh seems to have an openness to this idea in his opinion. He's not clear.
Didn't take a strong stance.
Now, am I saying shoot the guy down metaphorically because of this? No. What I'm saying is there's grounds for further questioning.
Ask him
before
about it.
He's given the rubber stamp to go off onto a lifetime appointment.
Amen.
Issue number 4 is endless standing to remove Christianity from the public square. Would you mind reading that excerpt from the Horowitz article?
All right. Let's see. In Newdow versus Roberts, an infamous atheist sued to take the words, "So help me God," out of the presidential oath of office. Aside from it being insane to suggest this violates the Establishment Clause, the notion that a random person can get standing to sue and that this is even a justifiable case violates the very essence of what distinguishes a court from a legislature. It lies at the core of what is allowing the ACLU to shut down our civilization for years with radical forum-shopped lower courts. While in his separate opinion, Kavanaugh ruled the right way on the Establishment Clause, he held that the plaintiff indeed had valid standing to sue as offended observers. This is the type of nonsense that is plaguing public prayer and display of the Ten Commandments across the country. It is simply astounding for an originalist to disagree with other justices in granting such standing, and is very consequential for cases that will reach the Supreme Court soon.
So, standing is basically injury. You can't just go around suing the government over this and that unless you have a real injury or a real interest in the case. And in this particular case, an atheist, didn't like the fact that the President of the United States had an oath to God in his inaugural oath, and Kavanaugh grants the guy standing to sue the government on this basis. So that opens the door for any atheist who's offended about any references to God to sue the United States government. You see that? And this creates an open door for this silly type of litigation to go forward. I mean, this litigation is so silly, it shouldn't even be considered by a court. And Kavanaugh may have been right on the issue of the Establishment Clause, but he was wrong on opening the door. And him opening the door paves the way for other silly lawsuits like this, you see? And so I think that needs to be explored at his nomination hearing by the Senate Judiciary Committee. So that would be issue 4. Issue 5 is, who did Kavanaugh clerk for? Well, lo and behold, he was the clerk for the retiring Justice Anthony Kennedy. Okay. And this may be the reason Trump has put this guy up for nomination, or has nominated this individual, because Trump is the art of the deal president, right? He may have worked out some kind of deal with Kennedy where Kennedy says, look, if I retire on your watch, I would like you to fill my vacancy with someone on my short list, someone I clerked for. Now, do I have any proof of such a deal? No, I don't. I'm just speculating as to why Donald Trump, who was elected to drain the swamp, would appoint somebody like this. Now, the judge that we really all wanted was Amy Coney Barrett. We actually played a clip of her being interrogated by Dianne Feinstein in our last Pastor's Point of View. And she looked like she would be the one that would really stand on the Constitution. Guess who she clerked for? She clerked for Scalia, a true conservative. This guy has clerked for Kennedy, someone that we've gone on and on about, who was never a true conservative to begin with. So that would be issue number 5. Issue number 6 is Kavanaugh actually promoted Roberts to Bush, number 43, President number 43, George W. Bush to rise to the position of Supreme Court Chief Justice. Now keep in mind who Roberts is. Roberts upheld Obamacare. Why? Because Obamacare is not a, what did I say earlier, not a mandate or penalty, but a tax. And that's how Obamacare, which was a socialist power grab, it was the government confiscated 1/6 of the economy through Obamacare. And they did that under the legal maneuver that it's a tax and not a mandate or a penalty. And Roberts got that idea from Kavanaugh. And it turns out that Kavanaugh is so connected with the Bush family and the Bush insiders that Kavanaugh is actually the one that recommended Roberts for the Supreme Court, to be appointed to the Supreme Court by George Bush. The Horowitz piece brings this out. Do you mind reading that excerpt to us?
All right. Perhaps in the judicial irony of all ironies, George W. Bush, on page 98 of his book, Turning Points, credits Kavanaugh, whom he nominated to the D.C. Circuit, for pushing him over the edge to pick Roberts for the Supreme Court over conservative superstar Michael Luttig. Brett told me that Luttig, Alito, and Roberts would all be solid justices. The tiebreaker question, he suggested, was which man would be the most effective leader in the court, the most capable of convincing his colleagues through persuasion and strategic thinking. George Bush says, I believe Roberts would be, or actually Kavanaugh says, I believe Roberts would be a natural leader. The former president makes it clear that it was his personal choice to pick Roberts. But what concerns me is that Kavanaugh thought someone like Roberts would be just as good as someone like Luttig. This is ironically the same concern I have with Kavanaugh himself. I'm very confident he will be better than Kennedy, and likely better than Roberts. But there is a huge difference between that and someone of Clarence Thomas's caliber, as we saw in his concurrence in the travel ban case, and his willingness, unlike his colleagues, to completely ignore any of the post-constitutional thoughts of the prevailing legal elite, even on the right. It would have been great to fill the seat with someone on par with Thomas, not someone who was preferred by Anthony Kennedy. That would have been the best poetic justice for a seat that should originally have been held by Robert Bork.
Yeah. So here's George Bush on the fence, as these Republican presidents are. Are we going to get a Rehnquist, Scalia, Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch? Or are we going to get a Blackmun, O'Connor, Kennedy, Souter, Roberts? And Kavanaugh pushes Bush in the wrong direction. According to Bush's own book, Turning Points, page 98. That would be issue number 6. Issue number 7, it's obvious that Kavanaugh is very connected with the Bush insiders. Now, I thought Donald Trump ran against the Bushes
Yeah.
and defeated Jeb Bush and got elected by saying we don't need another Bush in the White House.
Yeah.
Kind of repeated what Jesse Jackson used to say, keep out of the bushes. You know, I mean, you look at George Bush, and there's a lot of things you appreciate about the guy.
Sure.
He was an outspoken Christian. He did some good things on the war on terror. But here's the reality: is his father, Bush 41, was the first to speak of this murky New World Order that we were supposed to merge in.
Right.
And it was Bush 43 that looked like he was moving in the direction of the North American Union, which is a kind of a globalist conglomeration of Canada, Mexico, and the United States.
Yeah.
Fortunately, that did not become a reality. It's Bush 43 that did not exercise the veto pin at all in his second term, which helps explain why our national debt is at the proportions that it's in. And then Obama came to power and just continued that practice. I mean, if someone is that close to the Bush family, I'm nervous about the whole thing.
Rightly so.
I don't think the Bushes, they may have done some good, but they did a lot of bad as well. Mm-hmm. And so, the fact that Trump ran against the Bushes, defeated the Bushes, and now we're on the precipice of getting a Supreme Court justice that's part of the Bush inner circle. I mean, as much as things change, they're really not changing at all, are they?
No,
they're staying the same.
Yeah.
And this takes us to issue number, let's see, that was number 6. Actually, that was number 7. This takes us to number 8. We actually have some video on this. And let me see if I can pull that up. This is Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing when Bush 43, 2006, put Kavanaugh on the court role that he currently has. Mm-hmm. And he was asked specifically by Chuck Schumer here about Roe versus Wade. Mm-hmm. And this clip, I think, is only 30 seconds, but notice what Kavanaugh says, and we'll play it when the coast is clear.
If confirmed to the D.C. Circuit, I would follow Roe v. Wade faithfully and fully. That would be binding precedent in the court. It's been decided by the Supreme Court.
Ask you your own opinion.
And I'm saying if I were confirmed to the D.C. Circuit, Senator, I would follow it. It's been reaffirmed many times, including in Planned Parenthood versus
I understand, but what is your opinion? You're not on the bench yet. You've talked about these issues in the past to other people, I'm sure.
The Supreme Court has held repeatedly, Senator, and I don't think it would be appropriate for me to give a personal view on that case.
This was Schumer questioning Kavanaugh back in 2006 in this confirmation hearing to be appointed to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeal. Schumer basically asked Kavanaugh, would he follow Roe versus Wade?
Yeah.
Now, let's keep in mind what Roe versus Wade is. It's one of the worst decisions of our lifetime.
Yes.
It's essentially a decision where the Supreme Court came in under Harry Blackmun and came up with a constitutional right to have an abortion.
Yeah.
Which prohibits the states from regulating most abortions. And it's a decision that we've liked to see overturned many, many times. Mm-hmm. And no matter who we put on there, Republican or Democrat, they never seem to overturn this decision. This decision would, in fact, place the decision about regulation of abortion back in the hands of the people's representatives,
right,
not in the hands of some 9-committee or really 5-committee group of lawyers.
Right.
And so he specifically asked about this.
They asked him his personal opinion,
before
he was appointed.
Before he was appointed.
Yeah.
To the, what did I say it was? The D.C. Circuit mm-hmm. Court of Appeals.
Yeah.
And he comes out and says he will follow Roe
mm-hmm.
faithfully and fully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to know here with issue number 8 is, are these senators going to ask him about this? Does he still feel this way?
Well, and this senator kept asking him, well, I want your personal opinion. What's your personal opinion? And he kept
obfuscating.
He wouldn't answer the question.
Right. And his whole argument is, well, Roe is precedent.
Yeah.
Well, guess what, folks? We don't put justices on the Supreme Court to just follow precedent.
Right.
Because you know what, folks? There's a lot of lousy precedents.
Yes. Amen.
In our judicial opinions. Let me give you some. Dred Scott, 1857, says that black persons or slaves are not persons within the meaning of the 14th Amendment.
Yeah.
Terrible, terrible precedent.
Absolutely. Terrible.
We don't put people on the court just to blindly follow precedent.
Right.
We put them on the court to follow the Constitution.
Yes.
Now, they should take into consideration precedent.
Mm-hmm.
But guess what? Precedent is hostage to the Constitution, not the other way around. Yeah. And they should have the freedom to overturn precedents if they wanted to. The Supreme Court, after all, has reversed itself 200 times in our history.
Oh, imagine that.
How about this for a precedent? Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896, which says separate but equal. Mm-hmm. Now that was precedent for over half a century until it was finally overturned by Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. How about this for precedent? Cormazzo versus the United States, 1944, which basically held that it was constitutional to intern Japanese Americans.
Yep.
A lot of people would say that was terrible precedent.
Yeah.
And yet, my point is, just because something is precedent like Roe doesn't make it sacrosanct.
Right.
And here he's basically indicating he's going to follow Roe no matter what, at least to get his current position.
Yeah.
And I want to know, does he still think that way?
Yeah.
Or is he going to hold Roe and every other decision for that matter, no matter how well enshrined it is in American law, is he going to analyze those decisions in light of the Constitution? Yeah. What's your authority here, Mr. Kavanaugh? Yeah. Is it precedent or is it the Constitution?
Will he think for himself?
Yes, and I didn't really like his answer.
I didn't like it either.
Yeah. So that's issue number 8. Let's see, how are we doing there with our tech team? So far, so good. I want to put up another video. This particular video is from Judge Napolitano of Fox News. Before we get to issue number 9, Judge Napolitano of Fox News, being sort of a libertarian, limited government guy, and he basically makes a statement here about Kavanaugh, and I want to play this to sort of preview issue number 9. And I want to play this so people don't think we're crazy. Because people may be listening to us saying, you guys are so far out on the limb. What we're exposing here is exactly what Judge Napolitano, a well-respected legal analyst of Fox News, himself indicated. And when the coast is clear, let's see if we can play that.
This person is at the heart and soul of the D.C. establishment against whom the president railed. Now, look, that's just my criticism. He's pro-life. He's pro-gun. He's pro-police, which rankles civil libertarians. He's also pro-Obamacare. He's also, well, an infant might have the right to an abortion. An infant immigrant might have the right to an abortion. We can impeach the president if he lies to the public. The president can do no wrong. These are not my words. These are words that he's said throughout his career. So one of the takes on him is he can be reckless with his words. Do I think he'll be confirmed? Yes, I think he'll be confirmed. But I think you're going to see some incoming fire, as Ed would say, from the right on him.
Why is Rand Paul, others, Tom Cotton, there are Republicans, as you suggest, who are skeptical of this nomination?
Because he is, at heart and soul, a big government guy, and because he is part of the Washington establishment against which the president rails as well. You remember Vince Foster, who killed himself in the White House. Right. How did his body get from the White House to Fort Marcy Park? Who was the prosecutor in charge of figuring out how his body got there? Who was the prosecutor that exonerated Hillary and the thugs that moved his body? a young Brett Kavanaugh. So that's going to come out.
He also was involved in writing the Starr report that eventually led to the impeachment of Bill Clinton.
Yes, and in that report, he originally said the president can be impeached for lying to the public. Look, all this stuff is going to come out. Who suggested to the Supreme Court that Obamacare could be upheld as a tax?
It was
Brett Kavanaugh.
Well, if Rand Paul doesn't support him, I know they have different opinions on the legality of metadata.
The metadata thing is very serious to Rand Paul and to libertarians. Judge Kavanaugh having upheld the authority of the NSA to capture metadata, the who, what, when, where of our cell phone calls without search warrant.
Okay.
The Washington establishment. All this stuff is going to come out. Who suggested to the Supreme Court that Obamacare could be upheld as a tax? Brett Kavanaugh.
Well, if Rand Paul doesn't support him, I know they have different opinions on the legality of metadata.
Wow. That was crazy.
Now, Brother Jim, doesn't he kind of sound a little bit like us
Wow.
in terms of his concerns?
Yeah.
In fact, he surfaced several issues we haven't even talked about yet.
Wow.
And had an opportunity to go into, and because of time constraints, probably can't go into. But what I'm saying is the view that we have here on concerns about Kavanaugh is not some far out opinion. It's completely consistent with what Judge Napolitano, senior legal analyst at Fox News, is articulating.
Yep.
Now, you'll notice that one of the things he brought up here, and I was shocked to see that Fox News even covered this, because usually Fox News won't cover an issue like this, because those that even bring this up are considered conspiracy theorists, close quote, is the whole issue of Vince Foster. Do you remember a name, Vince Foster?
Oh, yes, I do.
Now, this would go back 25 years. Vince Foster, who was the deputy White House counsel under the Clinton administration, showed up dead. I think it was in, Marcy Park, is the name of it?
I think that's right.
Nearby in Washington, D.C. And the issue is, well, how did this guy end up dead? One theory is he committed suicide. That's what they want us to believe.
Right.
The other theory is the guy was killed because he knew too much. See, the Clinton scandals, we think of today the Clinton Foundation and Hillary with the server. What people forget is these scandals have been going on for 25 years.
Oh, yeah.
You can go back to the White House Travel Office. You can go back to Whitewater. And these scandals were swirling around the Clintons back then. And so there's a theory that this guy, Vince Foster, who was part of the Clinton inner circle, was killed because he knew too much. Why do we think that? Well, for one thing, his car was not at the park, because we're told he drove there to commit suicide. Well, his car wasn't even there. Another issue relates to the gun. The gun that he supposedly used to kill himself, he didn't even own. His fingerprints were not found on the gun.
That's interesting.
And that's interesting, to say the least. And beyond that, one particular witness, his last name is Knowlton. He says the gun wasn't even originally there when he saw the body. In other words, the gun itself was planted. So there's a line of thought here that this guy, Vince Foster, did not commit suicide, but he was actually killed. And this whole business of this theory moves rapidly into grand jury witness intimidation, because this guy Knowlton will testify that he was harassed by the government himself to get him to change his story.
Wow.
In fact, 3 federal judges, and this is probably the high point of justice during that whole Clinton issue involving Vince Foster, 3 federal judges from the U.S. Court of Appeals Special Division ordered Ken Starr, remember him?
Oh, yes.
The independent counsel, against his objection, to include these facts in the special report entitled Death of Deputy White House Counsel Vince Foster. And people can find that report online, and of course this official report was never reported by the press.
Of course not.
Now, having said all that, Brother Jim, who do you think the lead attorney was for the independent counsel's office during this whole thing?
I bet it's our man.
It's this guy, Brett Kavanaugh.
Wow.
In other words, there's a line of thought that says Brett Kavanaugh is actually part of the Vince Foster murder cover-up.
Wow.
The former independent counsel, associate independent counsel under Kenneth Starr, was a guy named Miguel Rodriguez who quit. And the guy that took his place was Brett Kavanaugh.
Wow.
And according to this line of thought, Kavanaugh cleverly rewrote the report to conceal the truth about the gun and the car related to Vince Foster, and was actually involved through aggressive questioning in trying to shut up a grand jury witness by the name of Knowlton, who had access to all these things. Now, where did I hear this from? The journalist that's done the most work on this is Cliff Kincaid.
Mm-hmm.
And I would invite people to go to his website entitled www.renewamerica.com and to get the following video. It's entitled Judge Brett Kavanaugh and the Murder of Vince Foster. And I think we're going to be able to link that, are we not, Gabe, to our Facebook page. And there's a video there where two individuals that have been investigating this for 25 years are talking. And they're talking about the role of Brett Kavanaugh in this investigation. And I would just invite people to watch that 34-minute video. It's a really good investment of your time. And you ask yourself if this issue is not credible or not.
Yeah.
Because if this is true, Kavanaugh, who's about ready to become a lifetime member of the United States Supreme Court, was actually involved in the Vince Foster murder cover-up going back 25 years.
Wow.
Back to the Bill Clinton administration.
Wow.
Now, nobody's talking about this. And to be honest with you, I was shocked that Napolitano brought it up on a big pulpit or forum like Fox News.
Yep.
But you've got to get the full analysis from Cliff Kincaid. And I don't know, Brother Jim, do you think that's a reasonable question to get to?
I believe so.
The Judiciary Committee that's going to either confirm or not confirm this appointee. What was your role in this whole thing?
Yeah, that question has to be on the table.
Yeah. So, what have we entitled this? Skepticism about Brett Kavanaugh.
Unmasking.
Unmasking Brett Kavanaugh. Yeah. I want answers to 9 questions or 9 issues.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me he's very murky on these 9 subjects. Number 1, what's your view on the Obamacare regulation as a tax or a mandate penalty? Number 2, do illegal immigrants, particularly young immigrants, have a right to get an abortion in the United States?
Yeah.
Number 3, does the government have a compelling interest to impose contraceptions? And what's that word I can't pronounce?
Yes.
Abortifactants on private religious organizations. Number 4, do you believe in endless standing to remove Christianity from the public square? Number 5, you clerked for Justice Kennedy, and I want to know, how different are you than Justice Kennedy? Are you just going to be a Justice Kennedy Part 2? Number 6, why did you change George Bush, President number 43, his perspective away from a true conservative jurist to pick and moved us more in a Roberts direction? Number 7, how connected are you to the Bush family and the Bush dynasty? Number 8, you said at the lower court level that you were going to follow Roe fully and faithfully. Is that still your perspective?
Yeah.
Or will you analyze Roe from a constitutional point of view, and if necessary, overturn it?
Yes. Yes.
Just like we discarded Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson, and the Cormazzo issue. That's issue number 8. And issue number 9, what role did you play, if any, in the Vince Foster cover-up?
Yeah. Wow.
Some points of application is, folks, listen, if you have skepticism about this nomination, it's a healthy skepticism.
Yes, indeed.
It's not just consistent with what we think, it's consistent with what Judge Andrew Napolitano thinks as well. And the pro-Trump people will intimidate you, and they will try to silence you on this subject because they're so reactionary against Trump derangement syndrome that they act like everything Trump does is good. And I think it's the responsibility of American citizen to think independently.
That's right.
Number 2, I would actually invite you to email your senators and say, do not confirm this guy until these 9 issues are addressed.
Amen.
And then application number 3, if necessary, we should do what happened with Harriet Miers. We should pull the plug on this guy.
That's right.
And remove what I mean by that, pull the plug on him is remove his nomination from consideration, just like we did with Harriet Miers, because we're not going to put someone in a lifetime of appointment with this much power unless we get specific answers to these questions.
Yeah, we can't afford to make another mistake.
Yeah. Now, if we're not going to tear down the paradigm of an all-powerful Supreme Court, which is what I think we need to do.
Yes.
If we're not going to do that and we're going to rely on good judges to guide us the direct way, we're going to trust them with power and trust them to guide us in the right way, then I think, Brother Jim, we need to know the worldview of Brett Kavanaugh, don't we?
Amen. Yes.
So that's our point here today, folks.
Yeah. Boy.
I've done most of the talking. Do you have any thoughts or comments, questions?
Well, there was one quote we didn't mention here.
Yeah, please.
I wanted to read this
Yeah, let's
because I thought this was so good.
Yeah. Now this goes back to the original vision of the Supreme Court.
Right, and this idea that the Supreme Court wasn't viewed as, answering only to God. You know. And this is John Jay again, and listen to what it says here. He became the court's first Chief Justice, but hold your hats here. He refused a second nomination as Chief Justice because he thought the office lacked prestige. He didn't see that office as the be-all, end-all of his career.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. John Jay, when he was appointed Chief Justice by George Washington, had the opportunity to gain that position again.
Yeah.
And he basically declined the second nomination because he felt like it was a dead-end job.
Yeah. Completely different perspective that we have today.
And today everything is so topsy-turvy where the Supreme Court has all this power.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we bring that up just to show people the historical perspective.
Amen.
And to show people why we have to be concerned about this.
Let's get back to the Constitution.
I mean, Brother Jim, long after we're dead and gone, these policies by these Supreme Court justices will continue on to affect our children, and our grandchildren.
That's right.
And our great-grandchildren.
That's right.
Well, a few comments and questions have come in. One person says, make America constitutional again. Well, make that hat for me, and I'll put that on. Not M-A-G-A, M-A-C-A. What do you think about that? Let's start a movement, huh? Another person says, do you think Kavanaugh was put up first as a scapegoat, for lack of a better word? Maybe the second choice is the real choice, just hoping. I don't know why Trump did what he did here. I can only speculate.
But it doesn't matter, because regardless, if he's being put up as nomination, they need to ask these questions anyway.
That's right. That's right. Another person says, I so appreciate you connecting the dots between our current societal mess today and Darwinism. Another person says, do you think the selection of Kavanaugh is a commentary on the people that President Trump has around him as advisors? I do think there's some truth to that. I think Donald Trump, generally wants to do the right thing. But I think he's surrounded with some terrible advisors. Yeah. And, he ran against the Bush dynasty, and I think he ought to dismiss the Bushes and all of their various counselors from his inner circle, and he ought to get back to what he promised he would do, to drain the swamp. This is not draining the swamp.
Well, if you're going to drain the swamp, you have to take the plug out of the drain.
That's right. He's just moving people around. He's just moving.
Yeah.
He's just exchanging one swamp creature for another here with
That's
this
right.
guy, Brett
That's
Kavanaugh.
right.
And I'm not going to be bullied, folks, by people out there that are going to put pressure on me and tell me to get in line with the president. I'm not going to do it because I wouldn't be a good Christian if I did that, and I wouldn't be a good American if I did that.
Well, we want to be fair, too. We've come on here and we've said some very positive things about decisions that Trump has made.
That's exactly right.
So we're going to be fair and balanced.
Exactly. I've heard that somewhere before.
Yes, I'm stealing it.
Another person says, seems Kennedy agreed to resign as long as he could pick Kavanaugh as his successor. That's sort of the theory that I go with, although I can't prove it.
Mm-hmm.
Another person says, I'm a 72-year-old housewife, and I have more understanding and wisdom of modern-day politics and spiritual matters than most of the public figures I'm familiar with. That ought not to be true. Well, in fact, I think it should be true, because the Constitution says we the people. I think we ought to be more knowledgeable about the people we send to Washington, D.C., maybe than even those people themselves, because they're accountable to us at the end of the day.
That's it. That's right.
And so I say to this 72-year-old housewife, may your tribe increase.
Amen.
And you ought to go out and teach these truths to younger people.
Amen.
Another person says, thanks so much for sharing this, Dr. Andy Woods. I so appreciate your objective point of view. Another person says, serious concerns about Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for this enlightening discussion. Another person says, Dr. Woods, when you mentioned judges were subject to removal for improper language, do you mean profane or obscene language? I'm talking about cussing in the courtroom.
No, at home.
Well, the drunkenness was at home.
Yeah.
But the cussing was in the courtroom. And judges back in the day were removed from that. They were never considered independent like they are today. It says, did it extend beyond language? It also seems to spill over. Its intention to maintain accountability over the executive branch and the legislative branch, for that matter, as sex scandals are far too common. Would you contribute to this shift in behavior or increase in transparency? Or should I say exposure through the media? Are Americans today really this different from the founders, or am I a hopeless nostalgian? God bless you. Well, I would simply say this. You can't hold people to account for anything unless you have a plumb line. And the more you get back into the original vision of our founding fathers, the more that plumb line is there. What's happened, Brother Jim, is that plumb line has been erased.
Right.
And so the republic is spinning out of control, and we don't even know why. And many times we don't even know it is spinning out of control. Well, I'm finished talking. And do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, the only thing I
comments?
would add to that is that, I don't want to be just a talking head here, but the issue is this. It all comes back to what we've said over and over again. Our country was founded on Judeo-Christian values, and it was those values that were articulated in the Constitution, in the Declaration, in these places, the rights, everything that we talk about goes back to that founding principle. Yeah. And so when they attack the founding principles and remove the founding principles, you get what we have today. Yeah. Sex scandals. Oh, it's no big deal. Right. That's private life. Private life doesn't matter. Yeah. That shouldn't be an indicator.
Yep.
Well, that's baloney.
And I think we've communicated that we're not spokesmen for one party or the other.
Right.
We're not spokesmen for the president. We're spokesmen for those founding principles.
That's right.
Which we think are found in Scripture.
Yes.
And we have a lot of reservations about this nominee.
Yes.
Well, if you agree with our mission and message, you can do something real easy for us. You can just press share on Facebook, and this will put this presentation into your friends list that we don't have access to otherwise.
That's right.
And this presentation is going to be uploaded rapidly onto YouTube. And so go to our YouTube channel, just type in Andy Woods, Pastor's Perspective or Pastor's Point of View, and it should come up. Yeah. And all things being equal, we're going to be with you again next week, but we're going to be meeting on Thursday rather than Friday. So keep watch out for our posts on Sugarland Bible Church. And so if there's nothing else, Brother Jim, I'm just going to go ahead and sign off at this point.
Sounds good.
All right. God bless you. We love
God
you.
bless.
And we'll see you next time.
All right.